Hey there, independent Scientologists. Discover a new perspective to your bridge by visiting ao-gp.org. Get in session with remote auditing using the theta meter. Are you curious about where you stand? Head on over to ao-gp.org now and take our free personality test. Join the growing group of independent Scientologists today.
Hi, and welcome to another AOGP Outside of the Church podcast. I'm here with Arthur Madakis. We are going to do season 8, episode 18. 17? 17. Yeah, it's got to be 17. I'm still waking up here. Episode 17, pardon me. And this one is entitled, How is Scientology or Independent Scientology Spiritual? So, it's a religious
That's a good
philosophy.
question.
Yeah, it's a religious philosophy, but how is it spiritual? What is spirituality, by the way? Let's look that up.
Actually, that's a good idea. All right, let's see what we've got.
There's philosophy,
okay,
and there's spirituality. Are they similar?
Well, the two are very different, aren't they? Okay, let's see what we've got. Okay, spirituality can be defined generally as an individual search for ultimate or sacred meaning and purpose in life. Additionally, it can mean to seek out or search for personal growth, religious experience, belief in a supernatural realm or afterlife, or to make sense of one's own inner dimension. Okay, is spirituality a religion? Religion leans towards external objective experiences like attending church or following rituals. Spirituality is inward focused, emphasizing inner understanding and a personal connection to the divine. Hang on, I'm going to look at this word divine.
I was going to say, let's look into that.
Of or like God or a God. So I guess what they're saying there is finding your own inner God.
And
so I suppose
for Scientology, that's to be determined by the individual, summated in the 8th dynamic, so to speak.
Okay, so what is the 8th dynamic?
Well, it is the summation of all of the other 8, per what he said in 1952. Now, he didn't write out those definitions wholly for several, a couple years later. I do know that when he was forming them, his communicator at the time, whom I worked with in the 80s when I was on staff, Andy Bagley, Andy told me once, he said, Ron approached him and said, what do you think about a money dynamic? That's what he literally said. He said, he's just talking. He says, what do you think about that? Is there a money dynamic and an exchange of flows on the dynamics? Because if that was the case, then there would be, there could be 9 dynamics because there's an exchange, and you have exchange by dynamics, which Candy Swanson wrote and LRH put under his name, and she was okay with it. What is your first dynamic? Give your second dynamic. What is your third dynamic? And then that leads to the 8th dynamic being the summation of the others. Scientology is one of those things that improves other religions. If you are so inclined to be involved in another religion and do Scientology, because, that's kind of what doesn't make it Scientology a religion, but some people feel very religious about it because it points to the divine. And my take on it is that the divine is yourself, as opposed to some other person moving marbles around type of a thing, in the physical universe or the spiritual universe, which brings us back to, is it spiritual? And my opinion is what does Scientology and Dianetics deal with? It deals with the spirit, the Thetan,
and the physical body as well.
And the physical body. Dianetics deals with the physical body, to it. I mean, with the effects that the spiritual being conveys to the body.
Well, could it be safe to say that the spirituality aspect of our beings has been there since birth, but then there are elements of the body that get in the way of that prevent us from being spiritual?
Well, that's
Is that safe to say?
it's safe to say, because the body, a thetan sticking their satanic finger, attention units, whatever you want to call it, thetan toe in the
Yep, yep.
body, the body is a huge impedance to the thetan. It's very similar to, and I've always thought that it's sort of funny as a analog. You see in the old 1930s Christmas Carol, Jacob Marley is walking around with these chains and these heavy boxes. He's dragging them
Yep.
around all over the place. It's very much the same way for a thetan with a body,
Mm,
because
mm,
your perceptions are so reduced, because you're having to push an elephant through a straw in through the physical
yeah.
universe to perceive. And so you're sitting there perceive,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
then
Yeah. Yeah.
when the guy exteriorizes, he's like, wow, this is incredible. This whole, wow, this is here. you know, so that's it. The body is an impedance, and Dianetics relieves that, because the thetan is tying significance and importance into it. It sort of would be like, and I don't know if people will understand this, it sort of would be like somebody saying, if this goddamn barometer would just work right, I'd know what the
Mm,
barometric pressure is, and I'd know what the weather was going to be like. It's always this
mm-hmm,
barometer, because it's a sensor.
mm,
The body has 54 sensors, and you're having to connect to it as a via. And when you remove that via, all of a sudden you become a hell of a lot more spiritual, because
mm,
it's sort of like you're stuck in the backyard, or you can't get out of the bathtub. So how are you going to perceive things? How are you going to do this? How are you going to,
mm-hmm,
that's
mm,
so it really does not help. But
mm,
that's what Dianetics and Scientology do, is they allow you to be more spiritual and pull you out of these things where you're identifying with either masses, ridges, same thing, um, the body and its masses, its ridges, its needs, its wants. Um, it's like going on a 75-year trip with somebody, and you have to make them happy too, because they're in the car with you, sort of thing.
sure. Sure. Okay.
Long answer.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. No, that's fine. That's fine. Because what I'm so as far as say the eighth dynamic goes, like with all the previous dynamics 1 to 7, they're all life based. Whether it's social, whether it's relationships,
Yeah, the interaction
financial, so on
between,
and so on and so on.
the interaction between, for the most part, well, the first, second, third, and fourth dynamic is your interaction with self. Second dynamic, mother, father, brother, sister, significant other, groups, and then worldwide. But
Mm,
where it gets back into spirituality is that at the lower end, you're looking at, okay, here's these people in bodies, and they are beings. At the high end, in Scientology, you're dealing with, we're all in the same room. We're not all one, which we did a podcast
mm,
on. We're not all one, but we all are in the same room, and there is no time, space, distance, or anything like that.
mm-hmm.
You can find whoever you're
Yep.
looking for, if they even resemble what it is that you're looking for, on the OT levels, on a meter, and address things with those beings.
Yep.
So to me,
Yep.
that
Yep.
seems pretty darn spiritual.
but to get to that point, there's an element of work that's
Oh,
required.
there is an element of work required, and that element of work is to disenfranchise yourself from the convincing that you have done, and other elements and other dynamics have convinced you to believe that you are not spiritual. That's
Yep.
my that's
Well,
my
what
take on
about
it.
yeah, sure. Okay. Because like I see a world of spirituality opening up. However, it's based on divination. It's based on speaking to the dead. It's based on those kinds of elements, when is my next girlfriend or boyfriend coming? Future driven concepts.
Mm-hmm. And past,
And I
what
think
you're stuck in the
and
past.
past, yeah, sure. And I suppose if I was to, that's a really good one too, because the cool thing I love about even just basic auditing is there's nothing spiritual about it because it's all very physical. It's very body related, which opens up the spiritual.
Well,
So
and
once you
that's
resolve that, then you're
yeah,
no longer burdened by your your spirit, your
yeah.
being, your oneness, your
It's an
Satan.
yeah. It's important to note that as much of a hassle as bodies can be, um, you sure do need it a lot to go in session.
Yeah, yep, yep,
It's a
yep.
via. Now, I'm not saying that it is the case, and I'm not saying that it isn't. When you get to a certain point where you can handle things without needing any meter. I'm not saying
Yes.
that isn't or is the case, but it stands to reason that if you rehabilitate the spiritual being enough, um I think it would be rare, but it's almost sort of like a sick joke. I'm trying to be spiritual, but I need this body. I'm trying to be spiritual, but I need this body. Trying to be spiritual, but I gotta go in session. It's gotta sleep, eat, you know, be warm enough. It's it's uh it's a funny necessity, to say the least.
Yes, yes, yes.
And I
I think
even I even realized that on the OT levels a little bit about an aspect that we'll put a pin in that. Go ahead.
all right. Because even something as simple as say alcohol,
Hmm.
in the old days, alcohol was considered a spirit. Um,
Yeah.
you could see it and you could smell it, yeah, and it just evaporates into nothing. Like it
Hmm.
doesn't have a mist, it doesn't have a smoke, it just evaporates
Yeah. It flashes
in
off.
front of you.
Hmm.
So I'm wondering if there's a bit of a correlation there around the spirit being, like not in the flesh form, and then as an alcoholic liquid, that's the body. However, the spirit itself occupies the liquid and it just evaporates.
Well,
So, like, let's say you have a 50% alcohol,
yeah.
half of it will evaporate, leaving the other half behind.
Well, and that's probably why they, to some degree, that they named it that, is because it behaved in a similar nature. I mean, man tends to do that. Why is New York City named New York City? Well, it's because we want another New York City. There's already a New York.
Yep,
There's already a York. Now they're going to make
yep,
a New
yep,
York.
yep,
They're going
yep.
to make another town just like this other place, just free from taxation.
Mhm.
So
Yep.
uh and that comes down to symbology, which is
Mm.
man identifying with things in the physical universe. So that to the degree that man is trying to describe spirituality, you run into the conundrum of having to try and explain it with physical universe significance as concepts.
Yep. 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 Yep.
Therefore, alcohol behaves like a spirit. It's there and then it's not, type of a thing. Well, that's the other interesting thing is that um from a spiritual sense, Scientology gives a being the ability to perceive things and be aware of things that the body, in its limited fashion, as far as the visible spectrum, for example, the visible spectrum that the body can see is extremely narrow compared to, well, even other animals.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that,
Well, are animals spiritual?
well, I think in a lot of ways, inherently, I think animals, in very narrow senses, are somewhat more spiritual than Homo sapiens, because you see
Because what I
little,
find it, yeah.
you see animals
Sorry, go.
they're aware of things. I mean, at least they can perceive them, or we think they
Yep.
can perceive them. They're looking at things, and you can see they're looking at things that we can't see visually.
Hmm.
So that's slightly
Yes.
spiritual. Go ahead.
Yeah. Like things like cats. Cats and dogs actually
Yeah,
are
that's what
very
that's
aware of these things.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's exactly what I was thinking. And um
Yeah.
I've seen lots of other animals behave in strange ways like that, that I never had any intention of seeing. I just happened to be in the right place at the right time. Um,
Hmm.
so I think that is the case, that there is a lot more going on than meets the eye. And
Yeah.
you know, uh, as far as other dimensions and stuff like that, you have a sock fall off the bed, and it's not on the floor, it's not under the bed, it's it's just gone, and
Yeah. Yeah.
chances are that thing fell into some other dimension, as wacky as that may sound to our listeners and stuff like that. But even modern earth science is saying, yeah, there are multiple dimensions. So that's,
Hmm.
that runs into, the we can perceive that it's there, and then it's not there. That's the limit of the body. And when you try to say, well,
Yeah.
man, it's in this other place, 20, 30 years ago, they would have locked you up.
Yep. Yeah, that's right.
So
But hmm,
continue.
yeah, it's an interesting one because it's another one of those words that is really undefined, and it really isn't an easy word to understand, or a concept to really. It's not as simple as, say, chair. Four legs, a platform that you can sit on, and a backrest.
Mm-hmm.
We can use a word like that, real simple words, and understand them and know them for what they are. But then you have this word spiritual come along, and there's a big movement towards being spiritual. Um, and in my mind, if you're alive, you're spiritual. If you're dead, you're no longer spiritual. If you're not
Mm.
born, you're not spiritual. Just the fact that you're alive and animating a flesh being says to me that you're spiritual.
Well, that's
Now,
interesting that you
your
say that
ability
about
of
death.
being spiritual, yeah, well, I didn't say you no longer exist,
Mm-hmm.
perhaps not to the observable eye in the flesh. You're no longer animating the body. It doesn't mean your animation doesn't still exist somewhere, somehow, whether
Mm-hmm.
it's on this plane or a different one,
Mm-hmm.
but it no longer animates a physical body.
Well, that is true. Um, spirituality. Well, spirituality is limited to the definition of what one thinks a spirit does, and so therefore it's
Okay.
a bit limited on, well, what's your recall
Yeah.
of what were you doing 100 years ago today.
Well, I'm sure in session I'd tell you. Yeah. You know what? I was actually probably doing some kind of alchemy or something like that, I reckon. Probably dissecting bodies to see how they work
So
because I
19
could.
July 5th, 1924.
Uh, somewhat, yeah.
So that the spirituality, it seems to me, it tends to be defined through the channels of what you can define the physical universe, which is, you're dealing with symbology, the symbols of everything. Whereas when you go outside of the symbols of things, now you're really talking about spirituality, but you have to pass through not using symbols. I mentioned this it was a while back.
So if you observe a tree,
yeah,
what is it really?
Well,
yeah, if
right.
I tell you to look at a tree, automatically you look at the tree,
Yeah,
because you can
TREE.
recognize it as a tree, but what is it?
Right. What is it without the significance of what you see and the significance and
Yep.
the word itself, TREE, and those sounds, and they put that together and it means this. It's a representation of a meaning, but what is, so that's spirituality is what that's what spirituality is it's not containing what's in the physical universe, but what is in theta universe. To me, that's the way that it seems.
Yeah.
And in doing the OT levels, you start to become of knowingnesses, awarenesses that have no physical representation to them at all. The a significance, if I said get an idea of a significance that didn't contain any physical universe characteristics.
Okay, I have a blank space.
Okay. Now, if I said, okay, let's bring that down into a way that we could convey to ourselves and to our listeners. What is that? What's the component of that blank space? There's actually quite a bit there.
Well, it's ready for
space.
Creation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
it's
like it's ready for
chalkboard.
creation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but the thing is, I'm so aberrated with words and nouns and meanings and things. I'm finding it really difficult to create something that I haven't already perceived somehow.
Right. You got all these added significances, and that is what LRH was trying to do, was trying to simplify and reduce down to its most common components or common denominator what a spiritual being is and can do. And so you have to you're sort of reducing yourself in so defining everything from a physical universe standpoint. And after a while, you start to believe I am of the physical universe, which sort of pulls you out of that spirituality umbrella.
Yeah. And it's almost like the creation of language is a pretty amazing thing. But sometimes I think it's one of the worst things we could have done, because now we need to use the same language to undo the things that the language has given us. Like, it's just this weird, I don't know what the right word is. See, I've got to use the language to explain the word as well, but I can't think of what the word is.
Exactly. And this is an important point. And you of all people would be really good to talk to about it. And I think it's a point that needs to be brought up. You've got, Scientology in the state of clear. Well, you've also got somebody who is a word clear.
Yeah.
And it tends to get overlooked. It tends to get overlooked because when you have a conceptual understanding of the basic building blocks of conveying concepts in the physical universe, you are a word clear. And conceptual understanding is a clear type in its own, because you just get it. There's no via. Okay, this is, let me think about this for a minute. There's none of that, because you're a word clear. I'm not even a word clear, and
sure.
I would love to spend the time and clear all the words in the study tapes and do the primary rundown, that type of thing. And you could do it solo if one wanted to. It's just, and maybe I'm just making excuses, the time to do it, but that's sort of beside the point. The whole thing is that if you clear these words, like when we did with you with the small common words, how that opens things up for you to function and operate, and the things that it changes that you have no idea that how these things are interconnected, because there's mass and
It,
significance is associated with these words.
yeah, that's right. It, hmm. So if I was to think about since then, as far as using language goes, and even applying it to spirituality,
Mm-hmm.
um, my general ability, my everyday general ability, has certainly increased, and even the way I speak has changed to a degree, and the way I listen has also changed, and so in a spiritual sense, my awareness has automatically increased, and in a way that's not as judgmental or as aberrated.
Yeah. Yeah. Just because of clearing up basic concepts in order to convey other concepts tied together, small common words.
And not just that, but I think as well, you know, in life, our biggest enemy is each other.
Mm-hmm.
It's not the animals, it's not the storms, it's not the weather, it's not tidal waves or disasters, because we overcome those things, but it's actually each other.
Mm-hmm.
And as simple as something as word clearing goes, you can see where um, I don't know. There's only one way to say it, but you can kind of see where people are at, and because you've done the work around just clearing words, you're not as judgmental to them. You seem to pick up more understanding of them as individuals, and how can I give someone a hard time if they're using their words incorrectly, especially after the amount of hours I spent just to correct maybe
Yeah.
100 words,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
that's only around 120 words, whatever it was. It
Mm-hmm.
wasn't much,
Mm-hmm.
considering the thousands of words that are in the language that we use all the time,
Yeah.
and they're just the small common words. And so my awareness, my patience, I think they're the things that push towards someone to be a spiritual being. It's not how much I can be okay with how much shit I have in my life, or thinking positive, or being okay with something terrible that's going on in my life. It's all about this understanding of something, and that will bring me more and closer to being a spiritual being, because it allows my senses to no longer be aberrated by stupid things, lesser things that aren't that important.
Mm-hmm. Well, and all we're talking about here is physical universe symbology, that
Yes.
when you say tree, just to keep it on sort of on that same subject with the original podcast. Sorry, I used that
Yeah.
analogy to begin with,
That's all
but
right.
you're what are you doing? And this is what LRH found out. He didn't find it out immediately, but he came to realize, especially with the advent of the meter and the data that he got from the couple that were researching study and misunderstood words and everything, and that was sort of the tag end of it. But when you're a being in the physical universe and you say a particular thing, whatever it is,
Yep.
whether it's tree, chicken, dust mote, thetan, whatever,
Yep.
that immediately is a stimulator to someone.
Yes.
And so every word can and does with any some or most particular people it's sort of a I don't know how to say this, and I'm using it as a funny analogy, but it's sort of like an incantation. You're conjuring something.
Sure.
You
Yes,
say
definitely.
chocolate milk. Somebody got a headache. hearing the words
Yeah.
chocolate milk. Some mass
Mm-hmm.
got created by a being in a body because of chocolate milk, and something happened, you know, with
Yes.
something as seemingly
Yes.
innocuous as chocolate milk. And so words ultimately are where this restimulation comes from. And then the physical universe is an extension of that, because you could either say that the physical universe was there and then people used words to describe it. That's, you know,
Yes.
it's caveman went, oh, and the other caveman went,
Yeah.
oh, and they both looked at each other and nodded their heads, you know, and so, oh, was that thing. Okay, now they've got agreement. Now they have ARC. Now there is a development of mass that one, like you said, a person, an LRH says this, you do, the thing you want to audit the most is terminals. That's these receipt points of communication. That's the thing. You look at the Scientology grades: terminals. Make a list, assess a list of the people that the PC thinks they look the most like. This is an actual process. I did this last night
Okay.
on grade
Okay.
0 with a PC. And then you take that, you know, and you're doing a communications process with that terminal. Why is that? Okay, because there's a significance attached to that terminal, and it's the easiest way to find mental mass and aberration, because those are the most aberrative things. Like you said, you know, hurricanes and tornadoes and earthquakes and all that stuff we get over, and sure, those are restimulators, but it all comes down to the stuff that we're creating, whether we see it or we stimulate with it with words.
Yep.
You
Yep.
know, a tree can be
And
just
you're
as
right. It
restimulative
is.
without mentioning it than it can be mentioning it.
Yes. 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 Yeah. Yeah. This whole concept of words being spells is, I think, is very accurate. Because even in your own mind space, when you're coming up with an idea, you know, like even you and I, before we started this podcast, what are we going to do? And so
Yeah.
both of us did speak for a few minutes while we're trying to think of something
Yeah, we both went,
to
oh,
talk
the other
about.
guy went,
Yeah, so
oh,
we,
and then this.
yeah, yeah, both of us are yawning.
Right. There was yawning involved, and there was like, you know, gosh, I don't know. And I'm looking on the Oracle and trying to find something and all of LRH's stuff. And I mentioned, you know, he practically had a lecture for folding napkins, and you know,
Yes, 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 yes. But
so
then all of a sudden something appeared, and
yeah,
then the spell happened, and here we are putting those words into something.
yeah.
You know, now we're putting that into some kind of mass. We're actually bringing it into the real world.
Right. You're
Um,
mocking this up as we talk about this. You and I talk about this. We're mocking up concepts that we are
yeah.
impelling onto ones and zeros through a computer that are going to another computer that are going out there, and then
Yes.
somebody's
Yes.
listening to this, and as they hear this, they're going, God, this guy talks a lot. Yeah. Or that makes a whole lot of sense. I never thought about it that. And that's the
Yeah. Yeah.
thing. And then you have the tone scale that goes across this, because what's being said is received, because of the chart of human ability, is received in a certain way. One person hears what we say and says, this guy talks a lot, and he's at one level on the tone scale, and one level of affinity, reality, communication, and understanding, and another person says, I never really thought about that way before.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
you see, and it just goes out like that. How I could explain that in one sentence to somebody, when somebody says, what is it you do? And
Help people.
yeah, I help people, and I avoid the S word, because it just, you know, because the S word, wait for it, the S word is restimulative to people, which is
Yeah.
in and of itself
Yeah.
saying tree, and they go, oh,
That's
tree.
right.
Oh no, I don't want to have anything to
That's
do
right.
with tree. So
That's right.
it is so deceptive how things can be spiritual and yet seem so innocuous at the same time. You know, a glass of milk. How is that? How's a glass of milk traumatizing to somebody? How's a tree traumatizing somebody? How's the word Scientology traumatizing to
Well,
somebody?
they've either had an experience or heard something.
Right. So they're A equals A equals A, which is, you know, the one of the basic
Yes. Yep.
concepts in Dianetics. And how is that? How do you make the jump for somebody to go from A equals A equals A words to spirituality? But it is manifest.
Hmm. Well, perhaps even A equals A equals A is spiritual in its own right, isn't it? Because it's a
Well,
valid creation.
yeah, yeah. Everything equals everything else is the wrong equation. One equals two
Hmm.
equals 60, two equals 64 equals 97 type of a thing. And
Yep.
and
Yep.
that is spiritual, but it comes down to what a person equates spirituality. When you say the word spirituality, one person thinks one thing, another person thinks another person
Yes, that's right. That's
thinks
right.
another. So at the end of the day, spirituality is based off of what it is that you define something to be in this sense, what has to do with the spirit.
Hmm.
And when you tell somebody
Well,
words have everything to do with the spirit, they look at you kind of glassy eyed and go, "What?" Right?
what if it's on the other side? What if it's a word that's been thrown in there,
Mm-hmm.
right? To keep us guessing and to keep us looking for something that already exists. So we're looking for something that we want, however, it's already there. And it actually distracts us from finding whatever this word truly wholeheartedly means.
Well, I would have to say that there are those who count on that in order to keep us occupied.
Because in the spiritual community, there's a lot of different ideas of what spiritual is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
A lot.
a lot.
Yeah. All faiths have their own idea of what spirituality is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, from the Christians all the way to Hindus,
Mm-hmm.
Buddhists, everything in between.
Yeah.
Yeah. Some people believe spiritual enlightenment comes through using substances, psychedelic substances, and that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Others believe it's just sitting with the self. Others believe it's through yoga. Others believe it's through tarot cards. Others believe it's through conjuration. Others believe it's going for a walk.
Yeah.
Others believe it's drinking the blood of a child. You
Yeah.
know what I mean?
Yeah. 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 And those are all valid instances. When I say valid, they're all real life examples of so-called spirituality. So it's a
Yeah.
moving target, and I would have to say that it's a moving target from a Scientology standpoint, based off of what is their level of ARC or their tone level.
Hmm.
Because what they
How
perceive,
so?
you know, well, like Ellerate says, you know, what's true for you is true for you. Well, when
Yep.
you look at things a certain way and you're at a certain tone level, the chart of human ability, you're going to see things are a certain way. Like how a person handles communication is one of the columns on the chart of human ability, and you can spot how a person handles communication on there, and then go, oh, well, this is that tone level. They perceive it in a certain way, whereas another
Yep.
person perceive communication in another way.
Yep.
So
Definitely.
it's all a matter of interpretation based off of the viewpoint of the individual and what their ability to perceive or what their ability not to perceive is. But yet it is still spiritual to that particular person, whether they're drinking the blood of a child,
Yeah.
for
That's right.
what is it called? What are they trying to get out of that,
Um, the
the Pizzagate
adrenochrome,
people? Yeah,
adrenochrome.
yeah.
Yep.
And there's that, because that is causes an effect. You know, it's a sensation. It's like eating a York peppermint patty. And then and that's pretty low on the scale, being bodies. And then at the opposite end, what was one of the other things that you said that, and this is yet we're looking at this through the interpretation of your interpretation of the levels of
Yes.
ARC. What would be spiritual
Yep.
to you? What's the opposite of that? Tarot cards, or I'm just joking around.
Okay.
You know what?
Yeah, I get you. I get you. I actually really like what Jesus says about it. I am that I am.
Mm-hmm.
And what I think is really cool about that is, let's say you're born into this world and you know you're an artist, and so you pursue that. I think that is the most spiritual thing a person could be,
Mm-hmm.
because they're actually being whatever they've been designed to be.
Mm-hmm.
They're not doing a job they hate, or they're not pursuing a life they dislike. Like, they're actually being what they were born to be.
Mm-hmm.
And then, and I think, like, in my personal experience, I know I swayed from my path. I know this. And then, I come across something like Scientology. That's like, well, hang on, you know, did you know this? And did you know you could that? And, oh, look, there's an issue. We can erase that, and we can work on that, and we could do this and we could do that. And I'm like, oh my God, where was this, you know, 30 years ago, when my life took a bit of a turning point, where I could have pursued and become the spiritual divine being I was meant to be, as
Yeah.
opposed to, cleaning toilets for a living and helping the occasional people, and then trying to, undo all these things that have been done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, beingness is a big part of spirituality. A
Yeah,
big part of it. And what are you? What are your interests? I mean, you ask a little boy what they want to be. Typically, they choose a terminal. I want to be a fireman, or I want to be an astronaut, or I want to be a
that's right.
scientist.
That's
you
right.
know that type of
That's
a
right.
thing, and that doesn't go away. But you get a lot more straightforward answer from a kid than you do an adult, because all of these complications enter in, and you know they
That's
answer
right.
they answer it's complicated. Why is it complicated? Well, there's some spirituality issues there that have occurred in between being a little kid and growing up, and that is the physical universe and terminals.
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
it
It's a
is.
hard one to answer wholeheartedly, isn't it?
Yeah. So
It's
it's a
it's and you're right. It's a very personal, belief driven answer. Like,
yeah,
it's not the same. It's not a chair or a tree.
yeah.
It's very unique in its own weird way.
Hmm. Well, it's extremely hard, and I spend more of my time um going over subject matter and doing analogies and trying to get ideas across to people. Probably I do more of that than I do auditing, when you include the
Sure,
podcasts and things like that, trying to get these ideas across, and people to understand it. And everybody has their own understanding of something, and it's the nature of the thing where they misunderstand it. They thought it was about this, but the thing is
mm,
you can only be aware of what you are capable of being aware of. So,
yeah.
at the end of the day, is Scientology spiritual? Well, I guess, it depends on who you're talking to about it as to whether they've seen the capacity for it to be spiritual or not.
Well, I actually believe it is, because even the podcasts you're doing on the remote viewing stuff, right?
Hmm.
At their peak, they were looking at abilities that weren't common, weren't part of the common structure. They're looking at using the body to be able to view things from a distance. A sensory aspect of our bodies that um, is teachable and can be opened up through certain practices, but there's no angelic attachment to it. There's no demonic attachment to it. It's just
Yeah.
a natural ability of the body. And because our bodies have been so aberrated in this social construct, in a sense,
Mm-hmm.
why would one even come close to believing that they could view an object on the other side of the world, or take a glimpse on the dark side of the moon from their couch
Right.
without
Why would
any
they want to?
technology?
Yeah. Yeah. What's
Well,
the
that too.
need for it? I mean, uh, I've done that sort of a thing, but it's never been for any other purpose. And I think this is interesting based off of what we've been talking about. I've never done it for any other purpose than trying to find another being to help them out. Not once.
Well, and then we could take it even further, because that's just remote viewing. What if it turns to remote doing? Let's say I have a family member on the other side of the world that's really, really ill with something. And what if I could remotely fix fix them like a machine?
Yeah. Yeah. Done. I mean, I can't say I've done it with physical objects, but I've done it with spiritual beings.
Yeah.
So what is that mechanical? No, because I didn't turn a lock or enter a code or, that sort of a thing. I mean, I guess I could. I've never tried, and I wasn't interested in, to me, it seems a little more parlor tricky than anything. Can you knock that man's hat off
Sure.
on the corner of Sunset
Sure.
and Vine, in Hollywood?
But it's that element of disbelief around those things that
Yeah.
make them unreal.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Oh, it has to be a trick. It has to be some kind of parlor trick. It has
Mhm.
to be an illusion. It has to be a something. But what if it actually is the way?
Well, and people that say that, and you're right. When people say that, it's kind of a low order thing. I've had people come up and say, "Well, you're OT. Prove it." you know,
Yeah,
what can you do? Can you move that piece of paper with your mind? And you just look at it and you just go, "Bitch, please." You have no
yeah, yeah.
idea. And getting that across to somebody is at that point it isn't going to go any further than that, because they're where they're at on the tone scale and what the reality level is. It's not about
Hmm.
it's not about that. It's more of a side effect than it is anything else. So
Yes, yes, yes.
these there are inherent abilities that come back to you. It's not like you got them and never had them before. It's abilities that you had and you forgot that you had control over. That's what the original OT, not all, but a lot of the original OT levels are about. LRH,
Yep.
and I think that these particular OT levels, the original 4, 5, and 6, I think these are the ones that push these individuals, Ingo Swann and Hal Puthoff especially, into, well, if we can do that, think of the other things that we could do. And
Exactly.
that's,
Exactly.
it's well, to me, it's squirrely. If you're going to go out,
Yep.
I mean, I mentioned yesterday that they were like, well, if you can do this, then that means that you can read minds too. And that's where they had
Mm.
they had a shit fit about it. They're like, wait a minute. I mean, LRH developed Andy Bagley, to go back to Andy again. Andy Bagley told me that LRH had developed a process, an auditing process that allowed the person receiving the auditing process to receive the thoughts of the people around them selectively. And
Mm.
chaos
Mm.
ensued, because once the person
Yes.
could do that, they were incessantly ARC breaking, because they actually got what people were actually thinking, either about other people or
Mm-hmm.
about them. And then he had to reverse
Yep.
engineer it to stop it for people, because it wasn't something that anybody could easily have, because
Mm.
even the person that had the ability wasn't really on the same page with these other
Mm-hmm.
people. They just had this ability. And isn't that what this whole remote viewing cabal is about? Is we have something you don't. We know what you're thinking.
Yeah.
We know what you're doing.
Yeah.
How screwed up is that?
But that's how this society has created us.
Yeah.
You know, and the funny thing about that is we're the ones continuing that creation.
That's right. That's right.
You know, we're continuing these ideas that go against us as incredible beings.
Mm-hmm.
And we're living in such an unincredible way.
Yeah. It's an
Like, it's
extremely
mind-blowing.
narrow aspect. Yeah, it is. I sometimes I'd like to tell people when they ask what Scientology's about is have you looked at what you're doing lately?
Yeah.
Have you looked at what you're being lately? You know, what could a society of 8 billion beings in bodies achieve if they weren't so concerned about what the other beings thought and what the other beings were doing to them, and they were all on the same page? Let's just leave
That's
it at
right.
that. Let's just leave it at that. Where
Well,
would we
could
be?
we have an Earth that way? You know, what if we're looking at it wrong? What if this is exactly how it's supposed to be?
Well, I think it is,
And
because
we're just a bunch of sooks.
yeah, we're just a bunch of fuzzy apes sitting in the tree throwing fruit at each other, and hey, there's somebody looking on going, it worked.
Yeah. So, is Scientology spiritual?
I would have to say that undeniably, whether, like where we were talking about this Scientology religion, I can't say that you could say that, well, it's a matter of viewpoint. I think that undeniably, it is spiritual. Even at its earliest beginnings with somebody, it is spiritual. And I'll say why. And as my mom would say, well, you have an answer for everything in Scientology. Yeah, your point. It comes down to concepts, words, describing things without, I mean, they're the fundamental tools that you have to use, that immediately you have an agreement, you have a pact in thinking words, thinking with concepts, communicating to yourself and other people. You right there, you're not on the doorstep of spirituality. You are involving yourself in spirituality. Yep. You just don't know it, whether you're dealing with Scientology or you're replacing the spark plugs in your car.
Yes.
Why am I doing this? Well, I'm doing this because this pushes me in this, and pushes me to work, and pushes me to be able to stay alive in order to perceive in this 54 sensor array that allows me to, well, just keep doing that. Well, that's a low level spirituality, but it's still spirituality.
Yep. Yes, I agree with you.
Ain't much, but it's something, I guess. And then you go from there.
Because there is an element of, look at what I can do, therefore I am spiritual.
Yeah.
There's a whereas, the person that says nothing, that's in the shadows, just doing their thing, they're also being spiritual.
Yeah, it's unavoidable.
And it's funny what you were saying earlier. Yeah, that's right. And it's funny what you were saying earlier about words as well, like the correct nature of words. Because even in the occult world, if one was to conjure a spirit using symbols, using sounds, using words, it has to be so accurate, right? Mm-hmm. Because if you decide, I don't like the look at that shape, my intuition says I'm going to use this shape instead. And my intuition also says, I don't like that word, I'm going to use this word instead. Well, you're not going to get the proper conjuration appear, are you? You're not going to conjure the appropriate thing. You're going to conjure something aberrated. You're going to conjure something that you didn't want.
Right.
And I think when it comes to Scientology, it definitely straightens you in such a way that, when you put your attention towards a new creation, it's what you want, as opposed to, you know, asking for roast lamb and veggies and ending up with a shit sandwich because, you know, you thought veggies meant this and they actually mean that.
Yeah, and I want to just touch on this extremely briefly. Is that, you know, we mentioned in an earlier podcast a few months ago that, you know, people are like, yeah, you know, I want to have the ability to postulate, da 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 da. Well, what you just
Yeah. Well,
described
that
there,
was
you
an
know,
ability there, wasn't it?
that with that right, that was an ability there. Is that
Yeah.
your postulation isn't something that you get. It is something that you do every day. I postulate I'm going to get up at 8 o'clock in the morning to do a podcast with Arthur at
Yeah.
8:30 in the morning.
Yep.
That's a
Yep.
postulate.
Yep.
You're conjuring using, you know, these words and symbols in you know, the dark arts type of a thing. Same thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Same thing.
Same thing.
And you make
Yeah.
decisions about things that are erroneous and incorrect and get you in trouble. Same thing.
That's right. That's right.
So whether you
That's
do
right.
Scientology or whether you do you just live, you're being spiritual, my friend. You are being spiritual.
Yep.
It's just there. It's on a low level, and you're in an automaticity, and nobody told you in kindergarten you're a spiritual being, and everything that goes on before I told you this and after is something that you are manifesting, you are conjuring, you are postulating, you are putting there. It's
Yes.
just a matter
Yes.
of what you do and you put there because of who you are.
Yes.
That's pretty much it. So, you know, if you expand upon this, is Scientology spiritual? Well, what isn't? Given that you are a
I,
spiritual being.
I think another aspect I really enjoy about Scientology is it doesn't really dive too much into these concepts in the way we've. I mean, for you, you've been brought up into it, right?
Mm-hmm,
Whereas for me, trying to find a greater answer, um, I've, I've explored so many different things.
mm-hmm.
And as far as Scientology goes, it's definitely the straightest. It's the most understandable. And what I love about it is it doesn't use these kinds of words. You know, the
What?
focus isn't to become spiritual as such. However, that is it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean it's weird.
Without saying, you know, this is going spiritual. And it's funny because you listen to a lot of the older, a lot of the earlier Scientologists, you know, now they're a lot older. And if you come across some of their things, they actually say it was, you know, it was the most spiritual experience of their lives.
Mm-hmm,
And they had so much fun doing it. And it was loving, it was caring, it was
mm-hmm,
joyous, it was so many things,
mm-hmm.
um, without that being the focus. It just became that
It
by
just
doing the
happened.
work.
Yeah.
It wasn't the focal point. I need to be spiritual, you know, killing themselves to become something they potentially may not. They actually became it by doing other work.
Mm-hmm.
Like it just happened. It's not something that, I don't know, how do you say it? It's not something that was their goal to be spiritual. It's something that happened automatically from the environment, from the work they were doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
And even Ron Hubbard, he doesn't use that word very often
uh-uh.
at all.
Mm-mm.
But underlying it, that is the intention, to become a supreme spiritual being with its full capacity.
Yeah, it's sort of like you're walking around as a Phaeton or an ethereal being, and you have a big huge dictionary under your arm that you've completely word cleared, and you know, you know, what other religion has a dictionary?
Well, and that's a great point.
What other
The funny
religion
thing
has a
is,
dictionary?
the law has its own dictionary.
Right. The law has its own dictionary. You know, you look at
Yeah.
where's the law on the CDEI scale?
Yeah.
enforced.
Yeah, well, and unless you knew there was a law dictionary and had the money to buy one, you know, you're living under its rules.
Right, right. And I mean, you could take every religion and run it up against the curious, desired, enforced, inhibited, know, and refused scale, CDEI scale, which above curious is understand and know. Okay, and you could say
Mm,
we could have flashcards, and we could say this religion, and say, okay, where is it on the scale, type of a thing, and just to define it.
yep.
And the thing is with Scientology, independent Scientology, and Dianetics, you're at no right off the bat. Why? Because there's definitions there immediately,
Yeah.
immediately,
Yep.
immediately.
Yep.
How many other things?
Yep.
And I'm not saying, my religious philosophy or my religion is better than anybody else's. I just think it's an interesting point to make, that here you have things defined, and in order to do anything with anything, the first thing you need to do is define it.
That's right. That's right.
Seems pretty sane to me. I mean, if you were to define things
That's
to
right.
a 2-year-old, and you just started defining these things to them simply in a way that they could understand, they would be a much more fascinating, productive, helpful adult, as opposed to
Yes.
enforcing something on them. I mean, we had somebody mention,
That's right.
I mentioned Aaron Smith Levin in one of our podcasts last week, and one of our listeners said, well, he didn't have any choice in being raised as a Scientologist. Well, it should have, and probably, well, could have been defined to him and everything like that. But you do have a choice if it's defined to you,
Mm-hmm.
as to whether it
If it's
resonates
defined
with
to
you or
you.
not.
Yeah.
Right, right. My
That's
dad was
right.
looking up words with me when I was 2.5 years old.
Mm-hmm.
I was playing chess at
Yep.
4. And to me, these were normal things, and I'd say, I don't know what this is. He'd say, go get the dictionary.
Yep. Yep.
I'd read
Yep.
Robert Heinlein books, and he'd
Yep.
he'd word clear me on them and give me a star rate on the chapters that I read before I could go out and play.
Yep. Yep.
Sounds rough. You're like,
Which
wow,
which
that's a shitty childhood, but
yeah. Yeah. Well, but then it all kind of goes back to withholds as well, doesn't it? Because like all this information is being withheld
right.
to some degree.
Yeah.
Well, probably not to some degree. It's just being withheld.
It's
Full
just,
stop.
yeah, it's being,
Full stop.
yeah. Yeah. And when you
Yep.
get to the withheld and the overt and all that stuff, you're getting down to the second phenomena of a misunderstood word. Isn't that ironic? Why would somebody
Well,
withhold
technically,
definition?
then that's right. Well, then technically, how many of us are acting overtly without even knowing it?
Right, right. And you get people doing that on a large scale, problem solved.
Yeah. Now it becomes truth.
Yep.
Yep. It's just
Yeah.
the way it is.
Yeah.
You'll be okay. It's just the way it is.
Right.
Yeah. You'll get over it. You'll handle it. It's just the way it is.
And that brings
Yep.
it back down to, well, there's spiritual, and then there is spiritual. And it's how it is defined to you. Because if things are
Yep.
defined incorrectly to you, and you have no other way of knowing otherwise, which isn't necessarily the case, and I think that there are people who see through that veil just because
Yes.
they're able. But
Yep.
for a lot of people,
Yep.
not so much. And therefore spirituality
That's
has a
right.
completely other definition than one would think. And misdefinition is an
Yes.
incredibly powerful thing. And like Ellerate says, he says, the only way to control a being is to lie to them. When it's
Yep.
put in its proper
100%.
context, that's what he's talking about right there.
Yep.
So,
Yep.
a little over an hour, and almost an hour and 15 minutes. This has been a good one.
All right.
A lot of fun.
It has been a good one. And yes, I do believe, yeah, Scientology is definitely towards a spiritual path.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah. And Dianetics too. We
Yep.
didn't get into that much, but I mean, the intent is the same on both levels. And some of the things in Dianetics are so deceptively simple that you
Yes.
just, how could that do that? Well, it does.
Yep. Yep.
So,
Yep.
spirituality doesn't have any matter, energy, space, or time. It just, this
No,
is what happens.
it's not even observable, which is
Ah,
interesting.
yeah. It's not even
Yeah.
observable. It's just shit's different. Oh, I want to keep doing this. Okay.
Yeah.
There you go. Well,
So, my
Arthur,
own personal perspective, it is a spiritual practice.
yes, mine too. But if it's true for you, it's true for you. And make sure you get the basic definitions, and you'll find out for yourself if it's spiritual or not. But
Pretty much.
strongly
Yeah.
advise giving it a try and applying it and see if it works, and then you'll know that it's spiritual for you. So for Arthur and myself, we want to
Yes.
thank you for listening, and we hope this gave you some food for thought. I think it will, and you'll probably have things pop in your head after you listen to the podcast if you get all the way through it. And feel free to leave us a message on YouTube, and let's get a dialogue and a conversation going, because we like to talk about this stuff. Arthur and I check it out every day. So we'll see you in the next podcast next week. Namaste, and we love you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.